Every morning, before the sun came up over the city, a woman in a grey uniform knelt on the marble floor of the grandest bank in town and scrubbed it clean with her own 2 hands. For 40 years, the men in the $1,000 suits stepped over her bucket without a word. They never learned her name, and not one of them ever suspected that the woman wringing out the mop at their feet owned a larger piece of that bank than every executive in the building combined. When the executors of her estate opened her safe deposit box, they found something they were entirely unprepared for: stock certificates. Hundreds of them, held for decades, never sold, every dividend reinvested. The largest single position by a wide margin was in the very bank whose floor she had cleaned since the Nixon administration. Her name was Della Mae Whitfield. She was never a banker, never a teller, never an officer of any institution that has ever existed. She was a cleaning lady. She earned, at her very best year, a little over $19,000. And when she died, she was worth $6 million. This is the story of how she did it, and of the room full of powerful men who had to sit in silence and listen to a lawyer tell them so out loud. To understand Della Mae Whitfield, you have to stand where she stood. 5 o'clock in the morning, a marble lobby the size of a cathedral. The lights still half dimmed, the great brass doors still locked, the city outside still dark, and one woman alone on her knees, making the most expensive room in the city shine for men who would arrive 3 hours later and never see her at all. She had taken the job in 1974. She was 31 years old, recently widowed, with 2 children and a mother to support. The bank was called First Merchants Trust. It was the oldest and proudest financial institution in the city. The kind of place with marble Corinthian columns out front and the names of dead founders carved into the lintel. They hired her to clean the lobby, the executive washrooms, and the boardroom on the top floor. 6 days a week before dawn, so the customers would never see the work being done. The pay was not good. In her first year, she earned the equivalent of about $7 an hour in today's money. No bonus, no equity, no pension to speak of, beyond a thin contribution that vested slowly over the decades. What the bank offered her instead, almost as an afterthought, the way you might offer a stick of gum, was the right as a long-term employee to buy the bank's own stock at a small discount through a payroll plan. Most of the cleaning and cafeteria staff ignored it entirely. Della Mae did not. Her supervisor would later remember the day she signed up. She came to the personnel window during her unpaid lunch break in her grey uniform and asked quietly, so no one would overhear, how a person like her could buy a piece of the company. The clerk almost laughed. Then he saw her face and he stopped. He slid the form across the counter. She signed up to put 4% of every paycheck into First Merchants stock. She would keep that arrangement unbroken for the next 40 years. 4% of a cleaning lady's wage is not very much money. In 1974, it was a handful of dollars a paycheck. A few coins, really, set against the marble and the gold leaf and the millions that moved through that lobby every single day. But Della Mae Whitfield had understood something the men in the suits had forgotten in their comfort. She understood what a few coins become when you never ever stop. There is an idea, very fashionable in our time, that small amounts of money do not matter. That the only path to wealth is a big salary, a big break, a big risk that pays off enormous. Della Mae Whitfield is the standing refutation of that idea. She never had a big anything. What she had was the willingness to take something almost insultingly small, a few dollars every 2 weeks, and feed it, faithfully, into a machine that does not care how big the deposits are. The machine of compound ownership cares about exactly 2 things: how long you feed it, and whether you have the nerve to leave it alone. To understand why she did it, You have to understand where she came from. Della Mae was born in 1943 in a sharecropper's cabin in rural Alabama, the seventh of 9 children. She picked cotton before she could read. She left school after the 8th grade to work. She came north on a Greyhound bus at 19 with one cardboard suitcase, a Bible, and $11 folded into her glove. She married a steelworker. They had 2 children. And then, when she was 30, her husband was killed in an accident at the mill. And Della Mae Whitfield learned, very young, the single lesson that would define her entire financial life. No one was coming to save her. She would have to do it herself, a little at a time, for the rest of her life. After her husband died, Della Mae did the math of survival, the way poor people have always done it. Not in spreadsheets. On the back of envelopes, in the margins of grocery lists, in her head while she scrubbed. She knew to the penny what came in and what went out. And from the very beginning, she insisted on one rule that she never once broke. Something had to go in the jar before anything else got spent. When the stock plan was offered at the bank, it was simply the jar made permanent, made automatic. The money came out of her cheque before it ever reached her hands, before she could feel it leave, before life could find a way to spend it. This is the single most important mechanical fact about how Della Mae Whitfield built $6 million. She made the saving happen first, and invisibly. And then she built her entire life around whatever was left. She raised 2 children on what was left. She put both of them through community college on what was left. She buried her own mother on what was left. And still, every 2 weeks, 4% went into First Merchants Trust, before she let herself touch a single dollar of the rest. People sometimes hear a story like this and assume the woman must have had some hidden advantage, a secret inheritance, a windfall, a rich relative somewhere off screen. There was none. There was a sharecropper's daughter with an 8th grade education, a dead husband, 2 children, and a mop. What she had instead of an advantage was a decision made once and then defended every single day for 40 years. The decision was simply this: the future got paid first. Always. No exceptions, no emergencies large enough, no temptation strong enough to break it. Understand what this costs emotionally for a poor person. When you have almost nothing, every dollar set aside is a dollar of present comfort surrendered. A warmer winter, a better cut of meat, a pair of shoes without holes. The wealthy save out of surplus. Della Mae saved out of scarcity. And that is a kind of discipline the men in the boardroom, for all their salaries and their degrees, never once in their lives had to learn. Now, let us talk about the men, because this is, in part, a story about them too. First Merchants Trust was run across the decades of Della Mae's career by a succession of presidents and senior vice presidents who were, by every external measure, enormously successful men. They earned 6 figures and then 7. They drove German cars, they golfed with senators. They sat in that boardroom on the top floor. The boardroom Della Mae polished by hand every morning before they arrived. And they made decisions that moved tens of millions of dollars. And here is the thing that the men got wrong, the thing that men in marble lobbies have always gotten wrong. They believed that the money flowed to them because they understood it. They believed that proximity to wealth was the same thing as the accumulation of wealth. They spent what they earned, and then some. The big house, the second house, the club memberships, the private school tuition, the boat. They earned 10 times what Della Mae earned, and they saved, in real terms, almost nothing at all. This is not a moral failing. It is simply arithmetic. A man who earns $300,000 and spends $300,000 has a savings rate of 0. A woman who earns $19,000 and spends 14 has a savings rate the man could never dream of touching. Wealth, as this channel says in every single episode, is not built in the salary, it is built in the gap. And Della Mae Whitfield's gap, as a fraction of everything she had, was the widest gap in that entire building. Year after year, those executives received their generous salaries, and let the cash run straight back out into their lives. And year after year, Delamay received her modest wage, and let 4% of it turn quietly into shares of the company they all worked for. They were buying lifestyles. She was buying ownership. And ownership given enough time always wins. Let us be specific about what Delamay owned, because the specifics are the whole story. Her largest position always was First Merchants, Trust itself, the bank she cleaned. Every payroll cycle for 40 years, 4% of her wage bought a small slice of the institution whose floors she scrubbed. And critically, this is the engine. She enrolled in the dividend reinvestment plan from the very first day. When the bank paid her a dividend on the shares she owned, she did not take the cash. She turned it straight back into more shares, which paid more dividends, which bought more shares for 4 decades, without a single interruption. But she was not reckless. She did not put every dollar into a single bank because a woman who had buried a husband knew that the world breaks things. So beyond First Merchants, she did something quietly brilliant. She invested in the things she could see working with her own eyes. She cleaned that lobby 6 days a week, and she watched what the wealthy customers carried, what they wore, what they drank, what was in the bags they set down on her clean floors. She noticed that no matter how rich or how poor the customer, everyone bought the same handful of ordinary things. So she bought the companies that made them. The cola company, the soap and shampoo company, the toothpaste company, the tobacco company that everyone publicly disliked and privately kept paying. Boring, profitable American businesses that sold the same products in good years and bad. She had never heard the name Peter Lynch. She had never read a single line of investment theory, but she had invented his most famous principle on her hands and knees in a marble lobby. Buy what you can see people actually using, and never ever sell it. And every one of those companies, like the bank, she set to reinvest its dividends automatically. So her money compounded on 2 fronts at once. The share prices rose across the decades, and the rivers of reinvested dividends bought her more and more shares, which threw off more and more dividends. In the quiet, exponential spiral that almost no one has the patience to let finish. Delamay had nothing but patience. Patience was the one luxury a poor woman could afford in unlimited quantity. Let us make the math concrete, because the math is the miracle here. Suppose Delamay put in roughly $40 a paycheck in her early years, scaling up as her wage slowly rose, into bank and blue chip stocks, compounding at the long-run American average of around 9 to 10% a year, with every dividend reinvested across 40 years. Run that forward, the 4% of a custodian's wage multiplied by 4 decades of compounding lands squarely in the range of $6 to $8 million. There is no trick. There is no luck. There is only a small number, an unbroken habit, and an enormous amount of time. This is the part that breaks people's intuition. For the first 2 or 3 decades, almost nothing seems to happen. The balance grows slowly, unremarkably, the way a tree grows too slowly to watch. And then, in the final stretch, the curve goes nearly vertical. Most of Delamay's $6 million was created in the last 15 years of her life, out of seeds she had planted 30 years before, which means the hardest part of her whole strategy was simply living long enough and waiting calmly enough to reach the part where the magic finally shows. 40 years is a long time to hold anything. And across Delamay's 40 years, the stock market did what it always does. It terrified people over and over again. In 1987, the market fell 22% in a single day, the worst day in its history. Grown men on the trading floors wept. Delamay cleaned the lobby that morning, the same as every morning, and did not sell a single share. In the year 2000, the dot-com bubble burst, and a third of the market's value evaporated over 2 long years. Delamay did not sell. In 2008, the financial crisis arrived, and it came for banks first and hardest. First, Merchants Trust, her single largest holding, The company whose floors she scrubbed lost more than half its value in a matter of months. Think about what that moment must have been. A lifetime of savings, decades of 4% paychecks, the bulk of it riding on a single bank. And that bank's stock collapsing on the front page of every newspaper in America. The executives upstairs were in crisis meetings. Some of them sold their own holdings in a panic. Some of them lost their jobs. And the cleaning lady, who owned more of the bank than any of them, simply kept cleaning. She did not check the price. She did not call a broker because she had never had one. She let the dividend reinvestment plan do the one beautiful thing it does in a crash. When the price is cut in half, every reinvested dividend buys twice as many shares. When the panic finally passed and First Merchants' trust recovered, and then climbed to new highs over the following decade. Della Mae Whitfield owned dramatically more shares than she had owned before the crash. The very catastrophe that ruined the men in the boardroom had quietly made the woman with the mop richer, because she had done the one thing they could not bring themselves to do. Nothing. She had done nothing at all. And let the compounding finish its work. There is a reason almost no one can do what she did. It is not a knowledge problem. Everyone knows in the abstract that you are supposed to buy low and hold on. But knowledge is not the obstacle. Fear is. When the headlines scream and the value of everything you have built is bleeding out in front of you, the animal part of the brain takes the wheel and shouts one word: sell. The executives, with all their sophistication, heard that voice and obeyed it. Della Mae heard it too. She just did not obey. She had buried a husband and crossed half a country alone with $11. A falling stock price did not frighten a woman like that. She had been afraid of real things. This was only a number on a page, she had decided, long ago not to look at. You may be wondering what a woman secretly building a fortune actually does with her days. The answer is almost unbearably ordinary. She woke at 4, she rode the same bus to the same marble lobby, she cleaned on her knees for 40 years. She came home, cooked a pot of beans and rice that lasted 3 days, read her Bible and went to bed early. She drove a used sedan that she kept for 22 years. She bought her clothes from the same discount rack she had shopped from in 1975. She never took a vacation that required an airplane. She gave generously to her church every single Sunday, in cash, in a plain white envelope, and told no one the amount. Her neighbours, her co-workers, even her own grown children, believed that Della Mae was just getting by. They worried about her the way you worry about an elderly relative on a fixed income. Her son once offered to help her with her grocery bills. She thanked him, kissed his forehead, and quietly declined. She let them believe she was poor, not out of deceit, but because the secret was never about looking rich. It was never about anyone knowing. The money she had decided long ago was for something, and the something was not herself. And here is the detail that makes people's breath catch. For the last 20 years of her life, Della Mae was already a millionaire, then a multimillionaire. She rode the same early bus in the same grey uniform to scrub the same marble floor, while carrying on a folded statement in her handbag a net worth that exceeded the man whose corner office she dusted. She did not retire when she could have. She did not buy a single comfort she did not already have, because the work was never the thing she was trying to escape. The work was her dignity. The fortune was for someone else. She did have one small circle of people who knew the truth. Late in her life, she found a young attorney at a legal aid clinic, a woman who had grown up poor herself. And over several years, in careful conversations, Della Mae explained what she had built, and exactly what she wanted done with it. She was not a lone wolf in the woods. She had one trusted person who helped her write it all down, keep her certificates safe, and make her final wishes legally certain. That single relationship is the reason this story has an ending instead of a tragedy. Della Mae Whitfield died in the spring, at the age of 79, of a quiet heart that simply stopped one evening in her armchair, her Bible open in her lap. Her funeral was small, her church was full, and 3 weeks later a room of people gathered in a downtown law office for the reading of her will. Among them, by her own specific and deliberate instruction, were several of the senior executives of First Merchants Trust. The executives had come, frankly, out of curiosity and a vague sense of obligation. Someone in the Human Resources Department had recognized the name, a long-tenured employee, recently deceased, and word had reached the top floor that the old cleaning woman had, oddly, named the bank in her will. They assumed it was a small bequest, a few $100 perhaps, left back to the institution out of some touching, simple loyalty. They expected to nod politely, feel briefly moved, and be back at their desks within the hour. The attorney began to read. First, the small bequests. To her church, a sum that made the pastor, sitting in the back, put his hand over his mouth. To her son and daughter, trusts that would secure their retirements completely. To the legal aid clinic, where she had found her one trusted advisor, a permanent endowment. And then the attorney paused, looked up over her glasses at the three men from the bank, and read the part that Delamay had written specifically for them to hear. At the time of her death, the attorney read, Mrs. Whitfield's holdings in First Merchants amounted to a number of shares whose market value exceeded $4 million. Together with her other investments, her estate was valued at just over $6 million. And then the line that stopped the breath in the room. The attorney looked directly at the executives and read that Delamay Whitfield had owned a larger personal stake in First Merchants Trust than any officer, director, or executive then employed by the bank, more than the president, more than the chairman, more than all of them sitting in that room combined. No one spoke. The men who had stepped over her bucket for years, who had never learned her name, who had ridden the elevators she cleaned, and sat in the boardroom she polished by hand. They sat in a law office and learned from a stranger reading a dead woman's words that the most invisible person in their building had quietly out-owned every last one of them. And there was nothing for any of them to say, because she was right, and she had the certificates to prove it. Think about the symmetry of it for a moment. For 40 years, the bank had measured Delamay by her wage, the smallest number in the building, and concluded that she was the smallest person in it. But a wage measures only what flows through your hands. It says nothing about what stays. And what had stayed in Delamay's hands, quietly, certificate by certificate, was a larger piece of that institution than its own leaders had ever managed to keep. They had confused her paycheck with her worth. It is the single most expensive mistake that powerful people make about quiet ones. One of the executives, the youngest of the three, would later tell a colleague that he had walked past Delamay perhaps 4,000 times in his career. 4,000 mornings, and he could not, in that conference room, recall her face. He remembered the bucket. He remembered stepping around the wet floor and the little yellow caution sign. But the woman holding the mop had been, to him, a piece of the furniture of his own success. And she had owned more of his bank than he ever would. He sat with that for a long time. By every account, it changed him. The will did not stop there, because the executives had been summoned for a reason. Delamay had a message for the bank, and she had built $6 million in order to be able to deliver it. She directed that the great bulk of her First Merchants stock be placed into a permanent charitable trust in her own name, the Whitfield Fund, and the purpose of that fund, written in her own plain words, was to pay the wages and the college tuition of the children of the bank's lowest paid workers, the cleaners, the cafeteria staff, the mailroom, the security guards, the invisible people, the ones who arrive before dawn and leave after dark, the ones whose names the men upstairs would never learn. She used the ownership of the bank itself to lift up the very people the bank overlooked. She left one final instruction. A single condition attached to the gift. The bank was required in perpetuity to mount a small bronze plaque in the lobby she had cleaned on her knees for 40 years, bearing her name, her dates, and 7 words. She chose them herself. They read, "She owned this floor she knelt upon." The bank had no choice but to accept the terms. To refuse would have meant turning down a multi-million-dollar charitable gift in public from a beloved 40-year employee, and explaining why. So the plaque went up. And to this day, the executives of First Merchants Trust walk past the name of their cleaning lady every single morning, on their way to the elevators she used to clean. She made sure of it from beyond the grave. She made absolutely sure of it. So, what does Della Mae Whitfield actually teach us? Strip away the marble and the drama and the perfect poetic justice of the plaque, and what is left is a method any one of us can run. Lesson 1, pay the future first and make it automatic. Della Mae never had to summon willpower every payday because the money was gone before she saw it. The modern version is a single setting in your payroll or your brokerage. Money that you never touch is money that cannot be spent. Lesson 2, own. Don't just earn. The executives earned enormous salaries and ended with almost nothing because a salary is a river that flows straight through you. Ownership is a reservoir that stays. Whatever you do for a living, find the mechanism, a stock plan, an index fund, a retirement account. That turns a slice of your labor into a permanent claim on something that grows. Lesson 3. Reinvest every dividend by default forever. That single checkbox, automatic reinvestment, is the difference between $3 million and $6 million. It is the quiet machine that built her fortune while she slept. Lesson 4. Hold through every crash. The crashes that destroyed the panicking executives were the years Della Mae bought her heaviest, cheapest shares. When you reinvest through a falling market, the fall is working for you. The investor's hardest job and her greatest skill was simply doing nothing while the world screamed. Lesson 5. Buy what you can see working. Della Mae never read a financial textbook. She watched what every customer, rich and poor, actually carried home. And she bought the boring companies that made those ordinary things. You do not need to be brilliant. You need to pay attention and then be patient for a very long time. And lesson 6, the one that holds all the others together. Know exactly what your wealth is for. Della Mae knew decades before she died that her fortune would lift up the invisible workers who came after her. That clarity is what made 40 years of discipline bearable. When you know what the money is for, the sacrifice stops feeling like sacrifice and starts feeling like purpose. Notice what is not on that list of lessons. There is no secret stock tip, no proprietary strategy, no insider's edge that you would need a Wall Street salary to access. Every single thing Della Mae Whitfield did is available to almost anyone with a job and a brokerage account and the patience of a saint. That is the genuinely radical part of her story. It is not that she did something impossible. It is that she did something entirely possible, that almost no one is willing to actually do. The barrier was never knowledge or access or intelligence. The barrier was always and only the willingness to wait. Della Mae Whitfield knelt on that marble floor for 40 years. The men who walked across it never knew her name, never asked, never imagined that the woman with the mop was building coin by coin, paycheck by paycheck, dividend by reinvested dividend, a larger stake in their bank than any of them would ever hold. She earned a custodian's wage and died a millionaire 6 times over. She owned the bank that overlooked her, and then she gave it away to the people the bank would always overlook. 2 of the 3 things she left behind: the grey uniform, the 22-year-old sedan. Anyone who passed her could see. The third, the certificates, the $6 million, the ownership, was invisible for 40 years, hidden behind a quiet woman doing quiet work, in a room full of men who thought they understood money, and did not understand it at all. We talk a great deal in modern life about getting rich quickly, about the corner office, the big salary, the view from the top floor. All of it stepping every single morning, right over the truth, scrubbing the floor at its feet. The most reliable fortune in this country has never belonged to the loudest person in the building. It has belonged again and again to the quietest, to the patient, to the unnoticed, to the ones who own and hold and wait. Ordinary people doing ordinary work with extraordinary patience build slow fortunes. And every so often, one of them owns the whole bank and never says a word until the will is read. If you want more stories like this one, quiet people who built loud fortunes and gave them away, subscribe. The most invisible person in the room is so often the richest. We are only getting started.